I never planned on becoming a cave diver. In fact, the very first time I slipped beneath the cold, still water of a Florida spring, I wasn't thinking about danger or records or the strange silence that waits beneath the earth. I was thinking about how peaceful it looked from the surface, almost like a mirror placed in the middle of the forest. People always talk about the ocean like it's the most mysterious place on earth, but they don't realize there's another world right under our feet, dark, hidden, untouched. A world that doesn't care who you are, how skilled you think you've become, or how many dives you've logged. Cave diving in the United States isn't just a hobby. It's a silent agreement you make with the underground. Enter at your own risk. When I first started, I felt like I finally discovered the thing I was meant to do. I loved the weightless drifting through narrow passages, the way my light sliced through the pitch-black water, the slow rhythm of my breathing as I followed the guideline deeper and deeper. Cave divers talk about flow in a way that's hard to explain to anyone else. It's when your mind and body feel perfectly synced, when every kick of your fins feels controlled, and when the world above disappears like it never existed. Back then, that feeling became addictive for me. I chased it every weekend, sometimes even during the week when I should have been working. But people who aren't divers don't understand what it's really like down there. They think it's peaceful. And sometimes, yes, it is. But peace can turn into panic in seconds. You can go from relaxed breathing to feeling the entire cave pressing in on you. The water is cold, the walls are sharp, and the light you bring is the only light that exists. There's no sound except your air moving through the regulator. There's no sense of time. No sense of direction once you drift far enough inside. It's like being swallowed by the earth. My friends used to ask me why I wasn't scared. Truth is, I was. Every cave diver is scared. But we learn how to control it, how to keep the fear in a small box in the back of our minds. Some divers even say fear keeps you alive down there. But the moment you stop respecting the cave, that's when it decides to remind you who's actually in control. During my first year of diving, I made mistakes. Small ones, nothing serious. A fin caught on a rock. A silt out when I accidentally kicked the cave floor too hard. A moment when I drifted a little too far from the guideline. My instructor corrected me, warned me, drilled safety into me until it became second nature. I learned how to read the water flow, how to check my air without thinking, how to keep calm when the visibility dropped. I told myself I was getting better. I told myself I was ready for deeper, longer dives. But looking back, I think I was confusing skill with confidence and confidence with pride. The turning point came the day I met a diver named Eric. He was older, experienced, the kind of diver everyone looked up to. He'd been inside caves so deep and complex that most people never even attempt them. When he spoke, new divers listened. He had that calm, steady way about him, like nothing could ever shake him. But even he told me something once that stuck with me. It's not the cave you see that scares you. It's the parts you don't. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was being dramatic. But a moment would come later when his words would echo in my head so loudly I couldn't ignore them. The dive that changed everything didn't start out special. It was supposed to be simple, a familiar cave I had explored several times. I knew the tunnel system, I knew the turns, I knew where the visibility got bad and where the tight squeezes were. I felt calm that morning, maybe a little too calm. The sky was overcast, the air thick with humidity, but the water was clear as glass. I suited up, checked my gear twice like always, clipped into the guideline and began my descent. The first few minutes were perfect. The light danced along the limestone walls. The flow was gentle. My breathing felt slow and steady. I followed the tunnel deeper, letting the world above fade. But somewhere around the 900-foot mark, the cave changed. I noticed the flow shifting, nothing dangerous, just different. The water wasn't moving the way it usually did. It was subtle, but cave divers learn to sense tiny things like that. I slowed down, checked my air, and kept going. Then I saw it. A fine cloud of silt drifting across the passage ahead. That didn't make sense. No divers had gone in before me that day. No animals come this deep. The cave was supposed to be still and untouched. At first, I thought maybe the flow had changed enough to disturb the floor somewhere deeper inside. That happens sometimes. But as I moved closer, I realized the silt wasn't just drifting. It was spreading out slowly, as if someone or something had just passed through moments earlier. That's when the fear kicked in. That small box in the back of my mind, the one where I kept the fear locked away, suddenly cracked open. I shined my light forward, expecting to see another diver's fins, maybe someone who entered earlier without signing in. But there was nothing. Just darkness. Perfect, heavy darkness. I should have turned around. Every instinct told me to. But curiosity won for a moment. I inched forward, careful not to stir the silt any more than it already was. My light swept across the tunnel walls, across the floor, across the low ceiling. Still nothing. Then my beam caught something. Not a person. Not an animal. That moment my breathing grew uneven, fogging the inside of my mask. My hands trembled slightly as I tightened my grip on the guideline. I leaned closer, trying to understand what I was looking at, why it was there, who could have made it, how they could have been ahead of me without being seen. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I realized I wasn't alone in the cave. And the moment I finally understood why people like me, people who love the silence, the darkness, the weightless drifting, sometimes walk away and never go back. Because what I saw next made me quit cave diving forever. A mark. A mark on the wall that wasn't there the last time I passed through. I moved my light closer to the mark on the cave wall, trying to steady my breathing. At first it looked like just another scrape in the limestone, the kind caused by tanks or fins bumping against the rock. But the more I stared at it, the more it bothered me. It was too clean, too fresh. The edges weren't worn down by water flow, and there was a strange pattern to it, almost like someone had dragged something sharp along the wall in a deliberate way. Not random. Not accidental. It looked almost like a sign or a symbol, even though I couldn't make sense of it. I reached out and hovered my fingers just above the mark, not touching it but close enough to feel how rough the rock was. The silt continued to drift in front of me, making everything look hazy and unreal, like the cave itself didn't want me to see clearly. I backed up a little, shining my light in both directions along the tunnel. Still nobody. Still nothing. I kept waiting for some simple explanation to reveal itself. Maybe another diver exiting through a side passage I never paid attention to, or some geological shift that caused debris to scrape against the wall. But the longer I stayed there, the more the tension built inside me. I didn't like the feeling that someone had been there moments before, especially in a cave I thought I knew better than anything. That's when another memory surfaced, something my instructor told me during one of my earliest dives. He said caves remember everything. Every kick, every scrape, every careless mistake. But they also hide things when they want to. They let you feel safe just long enough for you to forget how unforgiving they are. It didn't make sense at the time. Back then I thought he was being poetic. Now, thousands of feet inside the earth with visibility fading, it didn't feel poetic at all. It felt like a warning I should have taken more seriously. To calm myself, I forced my breaths to slow down, counting each inhale and exhale. My heartbeat eased a little and I felt my mind sharpen again. I told myself to focus on what I could control. My air, my light, the guideline under my fingers. The basics. The things every cave diver depends on, no matter how experienced they are. My training came back naturally and I steadied myself, reminding my nerves that fear was normal. What mattered was what I did next. I checked my pressure gauge again even though I had looked at it minutes earlier. Still plenty of air. I wasn't in danger. At least not yet. I kept telling myself that, you're not in danger, but the cave didn't feel as familiar anymore. It felt alive, like it was watching. I swept my light across the floor again, and that's when I saw something else. It wasn't big. In fact, it was so small that I almost missed it completely. But there, half buried in silt, was a single piece of something that definitely didn't belong in a cave. A thin strip of material, like the edge of a glove or part of a fin strap. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it didn't look old. The color had barely faded. The edges weren't worn. Someone had been there. Someone who hadn't signed in, hadn't left any trace at the surface, hadn't told anyone where they were going. A diver going in alone wasn't unheard of, but it wasn't smart. Most of us knew better. The community wasn't huge, especially in the US. If someone was missing, word usually spread fast. If someone planned a deep dive, they always logged it. Always. It wasn't just for safety, it was a rule. And this cave, this one wasn't a place someone would slip into casually. If a diver went missing here, it would have been a big deal. So why was there fresh silt, a new mark, and a piece of gear with no name attached? I felt that uneasy pressure build in my chest again. Not panic, just a weight. A heaviness that only grows when your brain senses something is off, even if you can't explain what. I thought about Eric again. He was the type of person who always noticed everything underwater. He could catch the smallest detail from 20 feet away. Once, on a dive together, he pointed out a tiny crack in the ceiling I didn't see until we were nearly touching it. He always said the cave speaks first, you just have to listen. I used to laugh at that, but now the memory felt different. I wished he had been with me that day. I wished someone had been. I hovered there for a moment, holding onto the guideline more tightly than I needed to. The cave was silent except for the soft hiss of my regulator. That sound had always been comforting, steady, consistent, but now it seemed too loud, too fast. The visibility continued to drop, Not from anything I was doing but from whatever had disturbed the water before I arrived. It was like following the shadow of someone I couldn't see. I knew I needed to make a decision. Keep going deeper into the tunnel or turn back. Logic told me one thing. Curiosity told me another. And I'll admit something I don't usually say. Part of me didn't want to be the diver who backed off just because something didn't feel right. That's the mindset that gets people into trouble, but at the time I didn't see it that way. I saw it as pushing forward, trusting my training, not letting fear dictate my decisions. But there was still that mark on the wall. Still that loose piece of gear half buried in the silt. Still the sense that the cave didn't look the way it usually did. I moved forward slowly, making sure not to disturb anything else. The tunnel narrowed ahead, the ceiling dipping low enough that I had to angle my tank carefully. The water grew colder, the light from my torch dimming as it bounced off floating particles. Each kick sent tiny clouds drifting around me, making the air inside my mask feel warmer and tighter. I kept checking the guideline to reassure myself. As long as I had that, I wasn't lost. As long as I followed it, I could always find my way back. But something strange happened as I moved deeper. The guideline itself looked different. Not damaged, not cut, but stretched. Like someone had pulled it tight in certain sections. Or moved along it in a hurry. The tension felt uneven, like it had been disturbed recently. I stopped again, hovering motionless, trying to decide what to do. I took another breath and my regulator rattled slightly. A small vibration, nothing alarming, but enough to make me aware of how isolated I really was. No noise. No movement. No partner behind me. Just me, the cave, and signs that someone else had been there, someone whose presence made everything feel wrong. I kept thinking about how many times I'd been in this cave before. How many times I'd felt safe here. How many times I thought I understood it. But caves can shift. They can collapse. They can reveal new pathways or bury old ones. And sometimes people go inside looking for something they shouldn't. The memory of a local story popped into my mind. A diver years ago who went missing in a nearby system. They searched for days but found nothing except a broken piece of his reel. People still argue about what happened to him, whether he got lost, whether a passage collapsed, whether he panicked and made a fatal mistake. Some divers think he followed something he shouldn't have, something he thought he saw. A shadow. A movement. A trail. But it was just a story to scare beginners, at least that's what most believed. But alone in that tunnel, I didn't feel like those old stories were just stories anymore. I moved forward again, slowly, cautiously, following the strange trail of silt until the passage widened. My light reached out into the open space ahead, illuminating the familiar chamber I had visited dozens of times. Except this time, something inside it wasn't familiar at all. My breath hitched. My light trembled in my hand. Because right there, at the far edge of the chamber, was something I had never seen before. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something that made every instinct in my body tighten. And that was the moment I realized the cave was about to show me something I wasn't prepared for, something that would stay with me long after I quit cave diving forever. I froze in the chamber, my light trembling in my hand. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The shape in the far corner was barely distinguishable, cloaked in shadows and the drifting silt, but my gut told me it wasn't a rock formation. Moved. Just slightly, almost imperceptibly, like it was aware of me before I even knew it existed. My breathing became shallow, controlled but fast, and I forced myself to take another look. The light caught on something metallic, or maybe synthetic, something that reflected faintly like a strap or a clip. My mind raced. How could this be here? Who, or what, was in the cave with me? I thought about turning back. That instinct screamed at me louder than any curiosity. But something kept me rooted. Maybe it was experience, maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was the fact that I had invested so much time, money, and energy into this life underground. But I edged closer, kicking lightly to avoid stirring too much silt. The more I moved, the more the chamber revealed itself. It wasn't just a wide open space like I remembered. There were scratches on the walls, tiny, deep gouges. They led toward a narrow side tunnel I had never noticed before, one that disappeared into darkness thicker than I could illuminate. I felt my heartbeat spike. The cave had secrets. It always had. But this one seemed alive, deliberate. Whoever, or whatever, had been here left a trail for me to follow, or maybe they didn't expect anyone to see it at all. I didn't know. And the uncertainty gnawed at me worse than fear ever could. I paused, looking over my shoulder at the guideline I had followed this far. Everything in me told me to retreat, to surface, to call it a day. But another part of me, the part that had fallen in love with cave diving in the first place, urged me forward. That part told me that every unknown passage, every shadow, every strange mark was exactly why I did this. I kicked slowly, carefully toward the side tunnel, trying not to stir the silt. My light flickered over walls that were jagged and rough, carved by thousands of years of underground water flow. And then I saw it again. Another mark, this one even more deliberate than the first. It looked like someone had traced a pattern along the wall, maybe a warning, maybe a clue. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that it wasn't random. As I followed the tunnel, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cave itself was watching me. The walls seemed tighter, the water colder. Each step deeper made my stomach twist, but I kept moving. My mind began running through possibilities. Maybe it was another diver, maybe an abandoned piece of scientific equipment, maybe a lost treasure someone had left behind. But none of it explained the faint metallic glint I had seen. Or the way the marks seemed fresh, like they were made only hours ago. Or the silt clouds that drifted as if they had just been stirred by something alive. Then I remembered a conversation I'd had with a local cave historian. He had told me stories of divers finding strange, unexplainable things deep underground. Objects that didn't belong in nature, remnants of lost expeditions, even tools that seemed modern but had no known owner. Most of the time, these discoveries ended quietly. Divers reported them, shared photos, and the items disappeared again into the depths. Occasionally, a diver would go missing and no one would ever know why. I hadn't thought much of those stories at the time, but now, being deep in the cave, alone, they didn't seem like tales meant to entertain beginners, they seemed like warnings. I reached a small chamber within the side tunnel, barely large enough to maneuver through. There, half buried in silt and darkness, was a backpack. At first, I thought it was abandoned, maybe left by a careless diver or spelunker. But as I kicked closer, the reflection of a small metallic buckle caught my light, and I noticed that the zipper was partially open. Inside, I could see what looked like papers, some gear, maybe even a mask. Whoever had been here didn't leave it properly secured. And that sent a wave of panic through me. If someone was still in the cave, why would they leave behind something so easily retrievable? I knelt, floating above the silt, and shined my light inside the backpack. The papers were damp and stuck together, but the top sheet had a symbol drawn on it, the same one I had seen scraped into the wall earlier. That was when my stomach twisted in a way I hadn't felt in years. The cave wasn't just hiding something. It was sending a message. Or maybe marking a territory. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of it. What could the symbol mean? Was it a diver's mark, some kind of secret code, or a warning I didn't understand? I pulled back slowly, trying not to disturb anything else. My mind raced, thinking of every angle. If there was another diver, someone experienced or reckless, they might be nearby. Or worse, they might be trapped, desperate. I considered calling out, but the cave swallowed every sound. My own voice came back to me muffled and strange, distorted by the water and the tunnels. I felt isolated in a way I hadn't felt since my very first solo dive. This wasn't just about risk anymore. This was about unknown intentions, maybe even danger I couldn't see. I backed out of the side chamber, trying to piece together what I knew. Marks, silt disturbances, the strange backpack with symbols, the metallic glint I'd seen earlier. Each clue pointed to a human presence, but it wasn't logical. No diver would take this route alone without logging it. No one would leave gear unsecured if they were competent. And yet, everything indicated someone, or something, had been here recently. The rational part of my mind screamed at me to retreat, but my training and curiosity urged me forward. I wanted answers even if they weren't safe. As I moved back into the main chamber, I thought about Eric again. I could almost hear him saying, "Listen to the cave." Only now, I realized listening wasn't just about observing currents or checking the guideline. Listening meant recognizing danger, noticing patterns, understanding when the cave, and the people who enter it, were trying to tell you something important. And I had ignored the first warnings. I had seen the marks, I had seen the silt, and I had kept going. That mistake now weighed heavily on me. I glanced at my pressure gauge, air still sufficient, but the thought of being stuck this deep with limited oxygen made me uneasy. Every shadow looked like it could move, every sound echoed differently than it should. The cave had shifted from a place I loved into a place I didn't recognize, a place that demanded respect, caution, and maybe retreat. But my ego didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not when the mystery was within reach. And that was when I noticed it, a faint trail of bubbles rising from the narrowest part of the chamber, where the water pooled against a hidden crevice. They weren't my bubbles. My breathing was steady and I had checked my equipment several times. Someone, or something, was further inside the cave, unseen, moving slowly but deliberately. My stomach dropped. This wasn't about curiosity anymore. This was about survival. This was about navigating a cave that could no longer be fully trusted. I knew then that whatever was waiting deeper in the cave could change everything I thought I knew about diving. It could end my exploration, my career, even my life. And yet, my body moved almost of its own accord, drifting forward toward the bubbles, toward the crevice, toward the unknown. I drifted closer to the narrow crevice, every kick calculated, every movement slow to avoid stirring the silt. The bubbles ahead of me shimmered like tiny stars suspended in the black water, rising steadily toward the surface, yet they didn't reveal their source. I squinted through my mask, straining my eyes in the beam of my light, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was producing them. My heart pounded harder than it had on any dive before. This was no longer a routine exploration. Something about this cave was different. Something alive, deliberate, and unseen was waiting deeper inside. Then it happened. My light flickered. I had checked my batteries before I descended, but underwater, in a cave this deep, every variable could turn against you. I tapped the light, trying to steady it, and as it flickered back on, I froze. There, just for a split second, I saw it. Not a diver, not equipment, not even an animal. Something darker, elongated, moving against the walls, almost blending perfectly with the limestone, yet somehow unmistakably alive. My stomach dropped and I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light, a shadow caused by the uneven walls, the swirling silt. But instinct screamed otherwise. Whatever had left the marks, the gear, the trails of silt, was still here, still moving. And it was aware of me. I pressed forward, gripping the guideline like a lifeline, my fins barely disturbing the water. The crevice widened slightly, just enough to allow a diver through, and my light swept over the narrow passage. That's when I noticed another clue, a faint, wet handprint smeared against the rock. I blinked, thinking I was seeing things. A handprint? This cave was deep underground, supposedly untouched. And yet here it was. Fresh. Recent. A cold chill ran down my spine. Whoever, or whatever, had been here wasn't just passing through. They had left signs, markers, and now a handprint. It wasn't random. It was intentional. And that thought made me realize something terrifying. I was not the first to encounter this presence. And maybe I wouldn't be the last. As I moved deeper into the tunnel, my mind replayed every story I had ever heard about divers who went missing in these underground systems. Lost reels, unexplained gear, bodies never found. Most of the time they were dismissed as accidents, collapses, or poor judgment. But the details didn't match what I was seeing. Someone had been inside this cave recently. Someone who knew its passages, its tunnels, and its secrets. And now they or it were still here. Then I saw it. A second backpack, smaller this time, wedged between two jagged rocks. Unlike the first, this one looked deliberately hidden. I floated closer, heart hammering, my light trembling as I examined it. A mask peeked out, the same metallic buckle catching my light, and a small notebook sat atop the gear. I grabbed it, brushing the silt carefully aside. The pages were damp, but some of the writing was legible. Names, coordinates, and what looked like notes on cave passages, but then something else caught my eye. A series of numbers that didn't make sense, almost like a code. And below it, a warning, do not follow the light. I froze. My own flashlight cut a narrow beam in front of me, illuminating the rock walls, the silt clouds, and the gear I had just uncovered. Was this a message from the previous diver? A warning from someone who had encountered the same presence I had? Or something more sinister? Someone who wanted to lure me deeper to make sure I didn't leave the cave alive? A sudden noise echoed through the chamber, a faint scraping like something large moving against stone. My head jerked up and I followed the sound with my light. There was nothing visible, but the water shifted as though something enormous had passed just beyond the edge of my vision. My pulse spiked. I forced myself to remain calm. I reminded myself of my training. Check your gear, maintain your breathing, follow the guideline. But logic couldn't quiet the instinct screaming inside me. I was no longer alone. I thought about retreating, heading back toward the main tunnel and the familiar exit. But then my light caught something unexpected. Another mark, etched into the far wall in the shape of an arrow pointing deeper into the cave. My first thought was disbelief. Who would risk leaving such a clear marker in a place this remote, this dangerous? And yet it was there, freshly carved. I realized in that moment that whatever, or whoever, was here wanted me to follow. The stakes had escalated. This wasn't a simple dive anymore. I floated there, suspended in the cold water, weighing my options. Retreat meant survival, maybe even sanity. But following the arrow could provide answers, or trap me in a nightmare I couldn't escape. My mind raced with questions. Was this another diver testing me or someone more dangerous? Were they trapped themselves or guiding me into something I couldn't understand? And the bigger question that clawed at my chest: how many others had come here before me and never returned? The cave around me seemed to pulse, shadows deepening, the silt drifting like smoke in a still room. My flashlight illuminated faint shapes on the walls, more marks, more symbols, almost like a language I couldn't read but instinctively feared. I realized then that the cave wasn't just a place to explore anymore. It had become a character in this story, an entity that watched, guided, and perhaps even judged. And the more I ventured forward, the more I understood that my curiosity, my ambition, my love for the dive, all of it, had led me straight into its grasp. Then something moved again. A subtle shift in the silt. A shadow that didn't match the tunnel walls. And a sound, a low rhythmic tapping, almost like someone, or something, was waiting, watching, signaling. My pulse quickened. The presence I had sensed all along wasn't just near, it was preparing, alert, aware. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, but my body floated forward anyway. My mind was a whirlwind of fear, questions, and adrenaline. I realized in that moment that the real danger wasn't the depth, the narrow passages, or even the cold water. The real danger was unknown, unseen, and it was closer than I had ever imagined. My heart hammered as I followed the arrow deeper into the darkness, each kick of my fins sending tiny clouds of silt spiraling around me. I tried to focus on my training, on the basics. Check your air, follow the guidelines, stay calm. But logic was drowned out by the creeping fear that I was being drawn into something I could not escape, something that had been waiting for someone like me. And then, just as I rounded a bend, the flashlight caught a glimpse of movement, a figure, or perhaps just a trick of the water, but it was enough to make my chest tighten, my vision narrow, and my every nerve scream. Whatever I had been following, whatever had left the gear, the marks, and the warning, was not alone. It was here. And it was about to reveal itself. I kicked cautiously around the bend, every muscle tense, my light cutting narrow beams through the murky water. The tapping sound grew louder, more deliberate, echoing off the cave walls like a heartbeat. I tried to convince myself it was another diver, someone lost, maybe panicked, but deep down I knew it wasn't. My gut told me this presence was different, something calculated, waiting, aware of me every step of the way. As I rounded the next corner, my flashlight swept over the shadow that had been following me all along. I froze, my fins hovering inches above the silt. It wasn't human. Not entirely. At first glance, it seemed humanoid, long limbs, a torso vaguely human, but its movements were unnatural, too fluid, too silent. Its head turned toward me slowly, almost deliberately, and I caught the faint reflection of eyes that glowed dimly in the light, like the cave itself had breathed life into them. My stomach twisted. I realized with a jolt that all the marks, the silt disturbances, the backpacks, and the warning note, they were all orchestrated. Whoever, or whatever, was here had been leading me, guiding me, testing me. I tried to back away, but the passage narrowed again, and the figure drifted forward as I moved back, mirroring me perfectly, blocking any escape. Panic bubbled up in my chest. I forced my breathing to slow, reminding myself of everything I had trained for, everything Eric had drilled into me. This was a cave. This was physics. Logic still applied even when fear threatened to override it. I scanned the walls, the ceiling, searching for any exit, any alternative route, but there was nothing. The path I had taken, the one I had thought was safe, had been a trap all along. Then it spoke. Not in words, not in sound that traveled through water, but in my mind, a voice, clear, calm, almost hypnotic. Why are you here? My heart pounded, but I forced myself to answer aloud. I explore. I dive. My voice sounded foreign to me, swallowed by the cave. The figure drifted closer, tilting its head as if studying me. The water around it shimmered strangely, disturbed in ways that shouldn't have been possible underwater. And then I noticed it. My own flashlight reflected against something metallic on the figure. Gear, straps, something worn and familiar. My stomach dropped. It was human. Partially human. And I realized with horror, it was one of the missing divers I had read about, the one who disappeared years ago in a nearby cave system. Only this diver had changed. Twisted. The years in isolation, trapped underwater, had somehow altered him, reshaped him into something else, something that survived but not in the way anyone could have imagined. Memories flooded me, stories of divers who got lost, who never resurfaced, rumors of caves swallowing people whole, of obsessions and madness growing in the dark. And now I understood. The cave didn't just test divers, it changed them. It had made him into a guardian, an entity, and all the markers, the gear, the notes. It was how he managed the cave, how he protected it, and how he ensured no one crossed certain boundaries. I tried to reason with him, speaking slowly. I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to explore. The figure tilted its head again. The glowing eyes softened slightly as if understanding, but also warning. Then, almost imperceptibly, it moved aside, revealing a narrow passage I hadn't noticed before. My pulse raced. Was it giving me a way out? Or was it leading me deeper into danger? I didn't have time to think. My instincts screamed at me to follow the guideline, the training kicking in. I edged through the passage as the figure floated silently behind me, a silent reminder that I was not alone. Every kick of my fins felt heavy, every breath precious, every second measured. And then the passage widened into a chamber filled with water that shimmered in a strange, unnatural way. Sunlight shouldn't reach this deep, yet there was a faint glow coming from cracks above, illuminating the water in golden streaks. I realized something impossible. The cave had a hidden exit, a route that few ever found. And the figure, the diver, had guided me here not to harm me, but to teach me a lesson in respect, in caution, in understanding the cave on a level deeper than I had ever imagined. I reached the surface of that hidden chamber, gasping, my mask fogging, heart still pounding. I could see daylight filtering through narrow openings above. Relief washed over me, but so did disbelief. Everything I had experienced, the marks, the silt, the gear, the whispers of danger, had been part of something bigger. The cave had chosen me, tested me, and ultimately released me. I realized that this wasn't just about exploration or adventure. It was about respect, patience, and humility in a world that doesn't forgive mistakes. That I turned back once, expecting to see the figure, to confirm it had followed me or disappeared into the shadows. But it was gone. The water was still, calm, serene, almost as if nothing had happened. The gear I had seen in the side tunnels had vanished too, leaving only a faint trail of silt as a memory of the encounter. I floated there, chest heaving, trying to comprehend it all. I had survived, but I was forever changed. The cave, the diver, the tests, they were all real, and the weight of what I had learned pressed down on me harder than any depth I had ever reached. As I began my ascent toward the narrow opening leading back to the surface, I felt a strange sense of closure, but also unease. The cave had taught me something essential, but it also left me with a chilling thought. I wasn't the first to experience this. And if I hadn't left when I did, if I had been reckless, I might never have emerged. Then, just as I broke the final layer of darkness and touched sunlight again, I noticed it, etched faintly on a rock just above the waterline. The same symbol I had seen earlier, the one scratched into the wall of the chamber. My stomach sank. It wasn't a warning for me anymore. It was a message. A signal that the cave wasn't done, that it had plans, patterns, and perhaps a will of its own. I shivered, realizing that no matter how far I went, how many dives I made, how much I thought I understood the underground world, it would always remain larger, older, and stranger than I could ever hope to comprehend. And in that moment, I made a decision I never thought I would. I would never dive in those caves again. Not for adventure. Not for curiosity. Not even for the thrill. The cave had shown me its power, its mystery, and its unpredictability. I had survived, but only because I had respected its rules, its guardians, and its dark, hidden currents. As I climbed out of the water and onto the rocky bank, the sunlight burning my skin after hours in the deep, I glanced back at the opening to the cave. A faint ripple disturbed the water inside, as if something had moved just below the surface. My pulse quickened. I knew then that the cave, the diver, and whatever it had become, were still there. Watching. Waiting. And maybe, just maybe, it would be ready for the next person who thought they could understand it. I walked away dripping, exhausted, forever changed. I had survived the cave, but the experience would haunt me for the rest of my life. The mystery, the danger, the presence I had encountered, it was a reminder that some things are bigger than us, older than us, and beyond anything we can control. And that's why I quit cave diving. Even now, years later, when I hear about divers going missing in the United States, I can't help but wonder if they're still down there, part of the cave, transformed like the figure I saw, guarding its secrets for eternity. That I climbed fully onto the rocky bank, my lungs still heaving, my muscles trembling from hours of tense swimming and weightless drifting through passages I barely recognized. The sun felt harsh after the darkness of the cave, its warmth alien and almost painful. Every instinct in me urged me to stay, to sit, to just let the light and air wash over me until my heart returned to a normal rhythm. But my mind was still running at 100 miles an hour, replaying every moment. The marks, the silt, the backpacks, and the figure that had followed me so deliberately through the tunnels. The memory of those glowing eyes was etched into my mind, unshakable, and I realized for the first time just how fragile a diver really is when faced with the unknown. I sat on the rocks, letting the sun dry the mask marks on my face, and tried to piece it all together. The cave had tested me in every way imaginable, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. The experience had been terrifying, humbling, and, in a strange way, exhilarating. I had survived but not unscathed. The lessons I had learned were clear. The underground world is unforgiving, the water holds secrets deeper than anyone can fully comprehend, and pride or curiosity can be deadly if not tempered by respect. As I packed up my gear and prepared to leave, I thought about the diver, the figure I had encountered deep in the side tunnels. What had happened to him? Had he been trapped down there for years, changed by isolation, shaped into a guardian of the cave's secrets? And if so, how many other caves had similar guardians, transformed by time, solitude, and obsession? I shivered. The thought of that underwater world continuing to hide mysteries I would never know made my skin crawl. On the walk back toward my car, dripping and exhausted, I reflected on the backpacks and notes I had discovered. They weren't left carelessly. They were deliberately placed, markers meant to communicate, to warn, to guide. Whoever had been there before me had understood the danger, the complexity, and the responsibility that comes with exploring underground caves. And in some strange, indirect way I understood them now too. It wasn't just about surviving the dive. It was about learning to recognize limits, to listen to the environment, to understand that there are forces beyond our control, no matter how skilled we think we are. Back in my car, I finally allowed myself to breathe normally. The rush of adrenaline had faded, leaving in its place a reflective calm, tinged with awe and lingering fear. I turned the key in the ignition and the engine roared to life, but I didn't move immediately. I sat there thinking about every dive I had ever done, every narrow passage I had swum through, and every time I had felt truly alive underwater. Diving had been my passion, my escape, my identity, but now I understood that it came with consequences I was no longer willing to risk. Driving away from the cave system, I passed other springs and rivers, glimmers of water catching the sun. My heart still beat a little faster when I thought about the deep underground tunnels, the darkness where no sunlight reached, and the presence that still lingered somewhere inside. I realized that while I had physically left the cave, a part of me would never leave. That experience had changed me permanently, shaping how I viewed danger, curiosity, and respect for the natural world. I couldn't unsee what I had seen, couldn't unknow what I now understood. Later, back at home, I started writing everything down: the marks, the backpacks, the notes, the patterns of silt, the strange figure. Part of me wanted to share the story, to warn others, to give insight into what cave diving could really be like. But another part of me hesitated. I knew the underground world thrived on mystery. Part of its power came from being unknown, from remaining hidden. Sharing too much might attract the curious, the reckless, the unprepared. And I couldn't bear the thought of someone else encountering what I had. I spent hours thinking about Eric, my mentor, and the lessons he had tried to teach me. He always said that cave diving isn't about conquering the underwater world. It's about humility, patience, and respect. I hadn't fully understood it until now. The cave had tested me in ways I hadn't imagined, pushing me to the edge of fear, curiosity, and survival. And through that test, I realized that quitting wasn't a failure. It was wisdom. It was understanding my own limits and respecting the forces beyond human control. In the following days, I tried to return to normal life. Friends asked about my diving trips, colleagues mentioned exploring other caves. I smiled politely, but I no longer felt the same pull. The thrill was gone. The adventure no longer called to me. In its place was a quiet, reflective caution, a sense that some experiences are too deep, too intense, too transformative to repeat. I started focusing on storytelling instead, sharing the lessons I had learned without revealing details that could endanger others. My passion shifted from exploring the unknown physically to exploring it through words and reflection. I thought often about the figure, the diver guardian of the cave. Had he survived this long because he adapted, because he understood the cave's rules, or because he had become part of it? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. But I respected the fact that he had existed, that he had survived, that he had shown me firsthand what happens when humans underestimate the underground world. Looking back, the biggest lesson wasn't fear. It wasn't the darkness, the silt, or even the unexpected figure in the depths. It was understanding that the natural world, especially hidden places like underwater caves, demands humility. It asks for patience, attentiveness, and respect. Every kick, every breath, every moment underwater carries weight. And sometimes the greatest risk isn't the cave itself, it's human pride, curiosity, or arrogance. I quit cave diving, but I didn't quit the lessons it taught me. I started sharing stories, teaching new divers about safety, caution, and respect, using my own experiences as cautionary tales without revealing the exact locations or secrets. Every time I spoke about it, I felt the presence of the cave again, not in a frightening way but in a reverent way. It reminded me that even when we leave a place physically, it leaves a mark on us, shaping who we are and how we view the world. Months later, I returned to some of the shallower springs, places where diving felt safe, almost ordinary. The water sparkled in the sun, and I watched other divers glide through it with ease. I felt a pang of nostalgia, a reminder of the life I had once loved. But I also felt gratitude, for surviving, for learning, for understanding my limits. I realized that adventure doesn't always mean going deeper or taking more risks. Sometimes, adventure is recognizing when to step back, when to listen, and when to honor what you cannot control. As I finished my notes, I glanced at the old symbols I had seen, now etched into my memory forever. The cave, the diver, the tests, they weren't just obstacles. They were lessons. And although I had left the physical cave behind, the experience had become part of me. It reminded me that the world is larger than we are, that mysteries exist even in places we think we know, and that survival isn't just about skill, it's about respect. I locked my notebooks and stepped outside, the sun warm on my skin, the wind carrying the faint scent of water. I knew I would never dive those caves again, but I also knew I would carry their lessons for the rest of my life. Adventure, I realized, isn't always about the risk you take. It's about the wisdom you gain, the boundaries you recognize, and the respect you develop for the unknown. And for the first time since that dive, I felt at peace. The cave had tested me, changed me, and ultimately let me go. I had survived. I had learned. And I had finally understood why I quit.